It's time for the Rose Chat Podcast, a podcast dedicated to celebrating the world's most beloved flower, the rose. Join award-winning gardeners Chris VanCleave and Teresa Byington as they chat with rose lovers and experts from around the globe. With each episode, you'll gain valuable knowledge and insights to achieve the rose garden you've always dreamed of. Listen now as we explore the world of roses.
Well, hello, friends. Today, I'm joined by my good friend, Connie Hilker, one of our leading experts in the world of old garden roses and rose preservation. Today's topic is Dr. Walter Van Fleet. We'll chat about his life, his work, and those amazing roses. Hey, Connie, welcome back to Rose Chat.
Hey, Teresa. Thanks for having me back. It's always fun.
Oh, it is fun. Connie, I was looking through the list of podcasts, and I saw that there was one that we did on noisettes, which is one of my very favorites, and that was in April of 2023.
Okay. So it has been a couple of years.
Time flies. It was a good one. And friends, you can find that podcast on rosechatpodcast.com. Just search for Noisettes, the Southern Belle of Roses. You'll love it. Now for today's topic. Connie, who was Dr. Walter Van Fleet?
Ooh, well, there's a lot about him, but we'll start. He was a very, very important hybridizer and supporter of the American Rose Society from its beginning as a public organization in 1916. You really couldn't have any contact with the ARS without finding something by Walter Van Fleet. And here's the first of the little fun factoids that we'll talk about today. He was actually the very first person in the US who was called a Rosarian in print. The reporter asked the man he was talking to, well, what do we call him? And he says, we'll call him Rosarian.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Well, I started reading about him, it's been at least 20 years ago, right after I positively identified a rambler rose in my garden as Dr. W. Van Fleet, which was one of the absolute most popular roses in America and the world in the early 20th century. And I quickly discovered that he was a fascinating person who had so many interests. And one facet was that he just made an indelible mark on rose cultures. He had the ideals he strove toward roses as garden plants. And these are still the guiding principles for hybridizers in gardens today. And many people talk about their favorite designer. And I say without hesitation that Dr. Van Fleet is my very favorite hybridizer.
Oh, there's many great ones. And he was there. He was there for us. He got things started.
He literally did. He got what we're working toward with modern roses now started more than a century ago. We'll do some facts just so we learn who he was. He was born in 1857, and he died unexpectedly at the tender age of 64 after a surgery in 1922. There is a lengthy tribute to him in the 1922 American Rose Society Annual. And some quotes from his sister said that he was an omnivorous reader, and I am absolutely going to steal that term.
I love it.
So he researched all aspects of whatever subject he became interested in. He first focused on birds and butterflies, and he studied ornithology, and he made research trips as a young man to document the birds of South America. After he returned to the U.S., he turned his attention to medicine and became a practicing physician for 10 years in his hometown in Pennsylvania. For a short time in the 1890s, he and his wife, Sarah, lived and worked in an experimental social colony, sort of like a commune in Ruskin, Tennessee. And it was there that he nurtured some of his early rose seedlings because he was already experimenting with horticulture. He started with gladiolas and quickly moved to roses.
Oh my gosh.
Well, one of those seedlings that was with him in Ruskin became American Pillar, and the other standout seedling would eventually bear his name, Dr. W. Van Fleet.
Wow. Boy, roses certainly did catch his attention. And he moved from medicine to horticulture.
Yeah. So he realized that the demands of his medical practice, said it took him away from his real love to hybridize and improve plants. And he just felt that was his true calling. So he closed his practice and he began hybridizing and experimenting with plants full time with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So he was a government employee.
Goodness.
Now, I say plants because he also produced notable improvements through his work with cannas, strawberries, already mentioned gladiolas, corn, gooseberries, tomatoes, peppers, geraniums. I've got a list here. Honeysuckles, and some others. One particularly significant facet of his experiments, he was working to develop chestnut trees that were resistant to the chestnut blight, which wiped out almost every chestnut tree in the American forests by the early 20th century. And that work is still going on also 100 years later.
Wow. Wow. So impressive.
Seriously, how can you not be impressed by this man?
Oh, I know so much.
Well,
it reminds me a little bit of our very own Dr. Wyndham. So I always think of him in roses, but dogwoods. His early work was with the dogwoods, and I love dogwoods. We have them all over our property here because I'm from Tennessee, and that's they were all over the place there. So a little bit of home here in Indiana, but you always think of him in roses, but there's other things in his background as well.
I was shocked when he and I were talking one day and discovered that he did Dr. Wyndham did extensive research with hydrangeas.
Oh, yes, that's right. I'd kind of forgotten that, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I asked him, I said, why didn't you tell me about hydrangeas? He said, you didn't ask.
Well, we are asking now.
Well, we're not going to talk about hydrangeas. We're going to continue with roses because we are Rose Chat.
Yes, we are.
Yes.
And I'm so glad that he did move his focus to roses. We benefited greatly from that.
Well, you have to kind of put yourself in Dr. Van Fleet's time, because in the late 19th century, the popular garden roses were the hybrid perpetuals, and they were starting the early polyanthas, but most of the popular garden roses were tender and finicky, and they were the ones that required the most maintenance and chemicals to be their best. And there was a lot of rose gardeners had no problem doing that, but they had limited success if they didn't. And Dr. Van Fleet was working to change this. He was focusing on developing garden roses that would be their best with less effort. Does this sound familiar today?
It does. Yes, it does.
A colleague of his at the Bureau of Plant Industry described Dr. Van Fleet as working toward producing rose varieties that would compare to the best of rose species, and that would be hardy under ordinary garden culture, and that would bloom continuously. And more than a century later, this is what the hybridizers are still working toward.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, he was an extremely strong supporter of the American Rose Society in its early days as a public organization. The American Rose Society started in the 1890s. I don't remember exactly which 1890, as an association of nurserymen. And in 1916, it opened up to public membership. And the first American Rose Annual spoke about this in 1916. And through 1916 through 1921, there were articles, both scientific and cultural, by Dr. Van Fleet. So we had, in the 1916 annual, he wrote an article that encouraged hybridizers to focus on garden roses over greenhouse florist roses that dominated the market in 1916. So most of the hybridizers were working toward roses that would do well under glass. He was encouraging them to work on roses that would grow well in the garden. He called these dooryard roses, and it's a term that makes me imagine a colorful garden right outside of the kitchen door, which is kind of what I found when I was at your house. Right outside the kitchen door is this beautiful world. So, Miss Teresa, you have a dooryard garden.
I absolutely love that description. Thank you. Thank you.
You're very,
Dooryard
very welcome.
roses. I love it.
It's something that I wish I could do here, but the back of my house is the second story. So I look over the garden, not into the garden, but that's okay. It makes me go out into it to experience it that way. So I've gotten used to it.
Well, I've also been to your garden, and looking out those windows is a special kind of magic. I think about that, especially with the cats laying in the windows. Absolutely the place to be in the morning. You have such a beautiful place, and so maybe you can't access it as quickly as I can mine, but you have a magical view as well.
Oh, honey, you make me blush. Thank you. Thank you. In 1917 and through to 1921, Dr. Van Fleet did more scientific articles where he reported specific successes and not necessarily failures, but room for improvement for pollinations and evaluations of the seedlings that he was producing at the Department of Agriculture facilities. He used almost every single Asian species rose that was in the United States. He was busily hybridizing with that, trying to get its best characteristics into garden roses. And very few hybridizers at the time were working with the new imports to try to do this. What I will say, just sort of as an aside, the USDA facilities were in Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. So most of the work that he did there is extremely applicable to me because I live 50 miles south of there. We have the same climate and the same challenges. So I think that's one of the reasons why almost all the Van Fleet roses that I grow really, really well here.
And they do. They're big. They're beautiful.
Now, in 1918, he wrote a second article for the annual, and I liked this one because he was describing the results of experiments that tested various roses as understocks for grafted roses. He concluded that the most popular rose at the time for rootstocks was Manetti, and it was very useful, quote, under general purposes. And Madame Plantier and Paul Néron were also found to be suitable and desirable. And I like this quote. He said, he specifically wrote that if a bud on Paul Néron was lost, the stock, quote, most honorably fills the place of any but the rarest varieties, unquote. So in other words, if you lose your scion, you'll still have a beautiful rose in its place.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So he also praised the use of Rosa multiflora and odorata as stocks. And he noted that using Rosa bracteata and the Cherokee rose as understocks could produce superior plants of tender roses. But he warned that the thorny canes and vigorous nature of those varieties could be a problem if the scion died and the stock took over.
Then you have a thorn bush.
Yeah. These observations are so relevant because I often find these plants in my travels as I'm wandering cemeteries or exploring abandoned home sites. And over the years, I have found Manetti and thornless multiflora and Rosa bracteata, Madame Plantier, and Rosa odorata. And I can just imagine the frustration of the original gardener when they discovered that the graft of their rose died and the rootstock had used the opportunity to emerge and take over. This is literally the same situation that we find in June with Dr. Huey growing all over the place. So it's just the more modern rootstock than the ones that I mentioned. And I will say that all of the roses that I mentioned, Manetti and multiflora and bracteata, they grow at Hollywood Cemetery and in Richmond. And I imagine that they probably were the rootstock that a rose was planted on. And in the case of Rosa bracteata, It crawls through the grass. It resists mowers.
Oh,
It takes,
no.
oh, it gets better. It takes any opportunity available to go vertical, and it drapes like a veil out of the shrubs and the trees.
Oh, my.
Yeah, we've tried to eradicate it and just decided it's a garden feature, I think. Mhm.
Now, Madame Plantier is gorgeous. So
Oh, it is.
you're
And
left with something really pretty there, for sure.
there's a beautiful Madame Plantier in the the cemetery in downtown Warrenton, Virginia, which is just about half an hour north of me. So again, I imagine it probably started out life as rootstock.
Mm-hmm. So I guess Bracteata would be, just erosion control.
Hey, that's a good idea. And
Oh.
security, because it is it is armed with thorns, as they say.
Mm. So
Yeah.
maybe the raccoons and the deer wouldn't like it.
I'm not going to go that far.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, in 1919, he wrote an article. He was praising rose perfume, and he especially mentioned the fragrance of Rosa rugosa and Siberica, recently imported from Japan, and Gallica and the centifolias from the Mediterranean, and Rosa virginiana in the eastern United States. And he reported on successes and disappointments of his trials with seedlings from Rosa rugosa, Rosa hugonis, and Rosa soliana. And he especially praised a seedling that was a hybrid with a very complicated parentage that showed just how far he would go to achieve his objectives. Yeah, this rose had Rosa satigera, Rosa odorata, Rosa witcherana, a white flowered form of Rosa virginiana, and the tea rose devoniensis. And it was given the code name of WS18, so it passed the trials enough to end up with a code name. There's a photo of this on page 31 of the 1920 annual, and it's also on Help Me Find if you just look up WS18 and you'll see it, or look for Dr. Van Fleet and then plants introduced, and it'll show you what it looked like.
Interesting. What a gift it is to have these past annuals.
Once people know that you collect them, and when libraries are being distributed, I end up getting emails. It's like, would you like to have these? And I always say yes, because I give extras to friends. So yes, I have a complete set of the American Rose annuals well into the 1970s. As long as it's a hardback book, then it's in my bookcase. If it's went to the magazine format, sometimes I have them and sometimes I don't. And then there is the American Rose Society. I don't know if they still do, but they did sell an index to the American Rose annuals that went through the early 1990s. That is incredibly useful. So I got it from their, I ordered it from their online store many years ago. And I used it for this because I needed to make sure I had my facts right.
Well, that's good. We appreciate that.
You're welcome. Now here's another one that we will all definitely identify with. In the 1920 annual, Dr. Van Fleet wrote an article where he reported on frustrations with weather interfering with his outdoor rose trials. And he described a wide variety of species roses that he was experimenting with. And at the end of that article is a paragraph from the editor of the annual that includes a transcription of a letter from the chief of the Department of Agriculture's Bureau of Plant Industry. And it was received in response to the American Rose Society's desire to see Dr. Van Fleet's roses introduced into commerce. Until that time, the only Van Fleet roses that were available for purchase were ones that he produced prior to his work for the government. So it was the same as today. If you work for the government and often other corporations, the work that you do for them, the products belong to them.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And they weren't available for sale. Yeah, the facility where he worked was geared toward growing fields of experimental roses and doing hybridizing and producing seeds and evaluating seedlings. They were not set up to produce roses for sale. Here's another little factoid. The 1921 annual, there was an announcement front and center that the American Rose Society was being organized and registered as a not-for-profit corporation in order to legally make a proper contract with the Department of Education for the commercial distribution of Dr. Van Fleet's roses. So we all know that the American Rose Society is a nonprofit corporation. This is where it started.
Wow.
Was in order to distribute Dr. Van Fleet's roses. And they were going to be the roses of Dr. Van Fleet's choosing. And the first three that they chose was Mary Wallace, which is a beautiful semi-double medium pink. In fact, it's actually reblooming in my garden right now. It usually gives about a quarter of a show in the late summer here. And then there are two others. One was WC 237, and there's a photo of it. It was a cherry red semi-double rambler that never got an exhibition name and doesn't seem to have been distributed. And the third one's kind of interesting. It says it was a Silver Moon Isabella Sprunt cross, and it never received a code number. But this sounds an awful lot like a rose that was introduced through the Department of Agriculture after Dr. Van Fleet's death, called Glendale, which is actually one of my very favorites. And the 1926 annual talked about that, and it's listed as probably being a Rosa Witcherana seedling crossed with the tea rose Isabella Sprunt, because apparently the parentage of that is undecided. So we can't say for sure, but it might be. Glendale is a superstar.
So how many Van Fleet roses are there?
On Help Me Find, it lists 34. And they're really, the folks who contribute to Help Me Find are really good about combing through all sorts of references, whether in English or whatever language, and they're very, very thorough with their documentation. So 34 introductions are listed there. And I did a real quick count by looking at the Buy From tab at the top of the Help Me Find description to see who would have them available for sale. And it looks like there are 15 of these that can be purchased somewhere in the U.S., and 19 of them are not available.
So how many do you have?
I had to count. I know. Anyone who knows me won't be surprised that I have a spreadsheet. So I know what I have, where I got it, and all sorts of things about it. So right now, if we were to walk outside, there are 14 roses by Dr. Van Fleet in the garden. I'll give you the list. So it's American Pillar and Dr. W. Van Fleet, Silver Moon, Mary Wallace, May Queen, Philadelphia, Bertie Bly, Sarah Van Fleet, Sir Thomas Lipton, Beauty of Rosemar, Ruby Queen, Alida Lovett, Mary Lovett, and a rose that I acquired as Pink Van Fleet, which actually was collected from the Department of Agriculture proving grounds before it was bulldozed in the 1970s by a friend who had permission. And we've all studied it, and Ann Belovich concurs that it is probably the lost best Lovett. So we have all three of the Lovett sisters, Alita, Mary, and Bess. Now, I used to have Dr. E.M. Mills, which is a beautiful yellow hybrid Hugonus that was incredibly fragrant. Breeze Hill, which was a rambler, and they were killed by winter a few years ago. I do not understand why E.M. Mills died. He had been hardy up until then. There had to have been something else going on, but my plant of Breeze Hill was never very vigorous, so I wasn't surprised when it just withered and died. Glendale is I lost it last year to rose rosette disease, and anybody's dealt with rose rosette, sometimes you just look at your roses from a slightly different angle and you see something amiss.
Absolutely.
And that one hurt because it literally is among my very favorite roses. I sent you pictures of it. The creamy white flowers are almost luminescent. They're just so gorgeous. But fortunately, I had shared cuttings with a friend, and he propagated a new one for me from his healthy plant. All I have to do is go to his house and get it. I just haven't made the time to go do that yet. So it's not in my garden yet, but it's not totally lost.
Also in the family, one generation removed as a sport, I lost my glorious New Dawn to rose rosette a few years ago, and I miss it.
Yeah, that one hurts. I watch my Dr. Van Fleet very closely because it's enormous. I try to get a rise out of visitors sometimes, and I will leave a cane of it to sort of crawl along the fence. And one year that cane was 30 feet long, and I decided that was excessive, so I cut it back. But still, it's an enormous presence. And I watch it carefully because it does tend to catch the wind. And the other one that I watch even more carefully is American Pillar, because I have that planted at the base of a cedar tree. And right now it is more than 30 feet up into the crown of that tree. And it, in late May, early June, when it blooms, it just billows out of that cedar tree. And after it finishes blooming, it's all but invisible because it's just crawling through the canopy of that evergreen.
Yeah, just gorgeous. Absolutely stunning. Well, something I think that would have made Dr. Flynn very happy was when the New Dawn received the first plant patent. That was in 1930. And up to that time, there was just nothing there. I mean, you hybridize a rose and anyone could make another one. Yep. And so just no way for our hybridizers to make a living or, make a little extra spending money. There was just no way. So this was very huge in the plant industry. It's so wonderful that it got to be something in his family.
Yeah, it protected the investment of the hybridizers and the nurseries. Now, one thing that's interesting is that the roses that Dr. Van Fleet's roses that were distributed by the Department of Agriculture, that was done through the American Rose Society to nurseries on as equitable of a system as they possibly could, so that everyone could fairly distribute these roses and nobody had a corner on the market. But Dr. Van Fleet specifically said that he didn't want any. He wanted nothing from this. All he wanted was his research to be out there in his roses in gardens for people to enjoy.
Truly dedicated to the backyard gardener. Don't you love that?
I love it. He said he was such an interesting person. Birds, plants, you name it.
Yeah. He sure had a huge impact on the world of roses. Now, I'm sure some of our listeners are wondering where to find. So let's talk about some of our suppliers that have these roses, and then let's talk about the Ann Bilovich project.
Okay.
So we have Heirloom has some, High Country, Angel Gardens, Rogue Valley. Who am I leaving out? Rose Petal Nursery.
I know Rose Petals. I know she has material for Pink Van Fleet. I don't know if she has anything available, but I know she has material for that.
I think she has either Sarah or Dr. W. Van Fleet.
Okay.
I looked.
Okay.
I think she's got one of those. So tell us a little about what's going on in the preservation of the Ann Belovich collection.
Folks with the ARS Rambler Committee have been working really, really hard to duplicate Ann Belovich's collection she specialized in American Ramblers, but then she quickly she got diversified, and there are hundreds of, I have the list in front of me because I wanted to double check it before we started talking. There are hundreds of Ramblers, many of which are not available in commerce, that she acquired through various means. Believe it or not, there were American Ramblers that were stuck in Europe easily. I remember 10, 12 years ago standing in the nursery at Kew while there was an entire row of pots of Alita Lovett available for sale right then. All I would have had to do was pick it up and put it on my cart. I got that one from an obscure nursery in Tennessee that closed probably a dozen years ago. And none of the places where I got these roses specialized in any of them. So there was, one here, one there.
Yeah.
And bless word of mouth and help me find to be able to locate these things. Mm-hmm. So they're centralized here. But in the case of Ann Belovich, she had hundreds of roses centralized in her property in Washington. Cuttings have been collected, plants are grown, and there is the Ann Belovich Rambler Garden well under development at the American Rose Center in Shreveport. And there are 13 of the Ramblers are in the Ann Belovich collection.
Mm. Talk about someone who researched everything and got deep, deep, deep into her subject. Ann Belovich, a total story for another day, but I am so glad, and I'm so glad that the American Rose Society has picked this up, and we will get those things back into nurseries so that people can add them to their gardens.
I think that back to the goal to have roses that are ever blooming. Mm-hmm. I think that many people in their gardens are learning that there is wisdom in seasons, and having roses that bloom only in the spring is a very valuable thing in a garden. My Ramblers bloom in the spring. After that, they're almost disease-free green background that supports the rest of the garden. And once you meet a Rambler in person, you never forget it. I promise.
Something that I've said many times, I'm sure our listeners are familiar, but I always call that late spring fireworks and fragrance. I cannot wait for it. There's just nothing like it. Seeing those big old-fashioned roses come into bloom with their millions of blooms and their fragrance. There's just nothing like it. I love the entire season, and I like all those that come next. But boy, coming out of a dark winter in Indiana, there is just simply nothing like the rugosas and the damask, and there's just nothing like seeing the display.
Oh, I completely agree. Your winters are darker and colder than mine. You are hardier stock than I. But seeing the buds on the Ramblers and the other spring bloomers, as soon as they start to get some color, suck in your breath. It's like, it's happening. It's happening.
Yes, it is. It is. And it is a glorious thing to see. Well,
Mm-hmm.
now I can't let you go without talking about your garden. What's going on in your garden?
Ooh, what is going on in my garden? The year started out really, really good because it was cooler than normal. We had plenty of rain, and the garden was extremely happy. Spring bloom was wonderful. And then for the past few weeks, we've had very little rain. It was very hot for a while. And the grass is looking pretty crispy, but fortunately, the roses are holding their own out there. I've got some scattered rebloom out there right now because we had a little bit of rain about a week ago. So that's helped everybody wake them up for fall.
Mm-hmm. So tell our listeners how many roses you're growing.
I think right now it's just shy or just over 500. I'm right about at the 500 mark. Every year, some of them die. One of the things that some people don't know is that whether a rose grows well in Virginia or not is not a concern for me. If I can get something that I've been looking for, I will grow it. Sometimes it succeeds, sometimes it does not. So often those, after a few years, will decide that either winter or hot summers are not where they want to live.
Mm-hmm.
So this year, we talked about the Ramblers, but the Ramblers were absolutely gorgeous this year. And I have to say my favorites, because my very favorite one is Arcata Pink Globe. I've always had a real soft spot for the mystery found roses.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an enormous Satigera rambler that was found in a couple of different places in California. And in my garden, it's in a corner next to a board fence, and it's scaling the tree that grows next to it and doing so with my blessing.
Mm-hmm.
And
They're so beautiful using a tree as a trellis. So beautiful.
it's perfect. Often if the tree is there and you haven't intended for it to go there, it'll do it without your permission.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. Well, I'm glad you've had a little bit of rain. We're 8 weeks without any measurable rain.
None?
We are crispy. 8 weeks. We are dry.
Oh,
We have a little bit of irrigation. We hope to work on more this fall. But oh my goodness. Yeah. Some things
most
are
of my
just living
garden is not irrigated. My front hybrid teas are. And the miniature, I call it the miniature garden only because it's lined with miniatures, but it's mostly shrubs and climbers in there. There's irrigation in there, but I've not turned it on this year. And that's the only place. New roses get watered by hand. And then after that, they're on their own. And it seems to work pretty well that way.
so much. I just thought, a little bit of irrigation at this stage would be nice, and I have enjoyed it, and I have been able to be a good rose mom because of that.
Yeah.
A little bit better rose mom with all this heat and the dry conditions. But yes, once they get established, they just like trees. They just do very well.
And that's exactly right, because once they're established, they're not going to die. They'll go dormant, they'll pout.
Yeah.
But afterwards, when the temperatures moderate and the rains come back, they'll start growing and blooming again.
I liken it to grassy areas. The grass will turn so brown and the roses will go somewhat dormant, like you say. But then as soon as you get rain, the grass is green and the roses come back. It's phenomenal.
That's true. And that's probably why Mary Wallace is blooming out there on the front fence, because we did have measurable rain about a week and a half ago.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been dry since then. So it really wasn't enough to make a big difference, but it was enough to wake up some dormant buds that she had over there.
Well, I'm so glad you had a good growing year. I'm looking at some of the pictures that you sent me, and they're just fabulous. I tell you, everyone would want a Dr. W. Van Fleet if they could see the picture of how it frames your house. from the driveway. Oh
yeah.
my goodness. It's
I
just
use,
so pretty.
I think I used that one as the cover for the announcement for my open garden a few years ago. See, spring was good.
Yeah.
Summer was terrible. You
Mm.
forget.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because deer
Yes.
found my
Oh,
garden.
yes. You had a deer issue.
Deer found my garden. See, I live in the country and I am surrounded by farm fields, and the farm fields have become subdivisions for the most part. The people around here that hunted no longer do. So really the number one predator for deer here, like most places, are vehicles.
Oh,
So up until this year, the deer were kind of a minor nuisance. I would see some nibbling here and there, but they were super skittish. And as soon as a person was as soon as they could see a person, they'd dash into the woods. So it never became really, it never, there wasn't that much damage. But late this spring and the summer, I noticed that I was seeing more deer in groups. And they got gutsy and they would come up to the house. I have deer on I have a motion activated trail camera that I move around the property to monitor things in my front yard. Yeah. I've never had that before. So I thought the first thing I needed to do was at least discourage them, since this was a new habit. If I could discourage them and encourage them to have a habit somewhere else, I would be good. So I started with deer repellent, and I did regular applications alternating Bob X and liquid fence, because both of them are listed to be rain resistant. So many of the other ones you have to reapply if it rained. That would have been fine in the summer because we didn't have rain, but in the spring we had frequent rain, and that's about all I would have been doing, was going out there putting on repellent. But the good stuff is expensive.
Yes, it is.
And it's really not a long-term solution for a garden that's as large as this. So last month, we enacted an idea that I had previously and decided we didn't need, but now we need it. And the back part of the garden that I call the rose field now has an 8-foot fence all the way around it. That garden is 75 by 100, and 2 sides are 4-board fence. So I just extended that up 4 feet with welded wire. And then I put a netting fence along the other 2 sides. And that has been, knock wood, magic, because the deer have not been able to get in there at this point. So even in just the few weeks since that fence has been up, the roses are recovering. Even without rain, they're recovering, they're blooming, they're growing. And last month, before we closed in the fence, I just wanted to sit on the ground out there and cry. And I was wandering out there this morning, just as giddy as could be, looking at the miracle of keeping the deer out and how resilient these roses are. So that protects about a quarter of the collection back there. There's like 120 some, and there's room to add more. So I have some empty space out there that I'm very pleased with. So Rosefield, we've got it taken care of. So the next part of it is we've got the area that's enclosed by a board fence behind the house. There's about an acre, but there's two gardens in there. The rambler fence is there and the miniature garden are there. And it's going to be fairly simple for us to extend that fence also up to 8 feet. So that will protect that area. Probably hope to get that done in the next month. Only thing left is the front garden where the hybrid teas live, where most of the munching was happening. So I don't think I can fence that. I can't put an 8-foot wire fence in front of my house.
But if that's all you have to spray for the deer, that has lessened your work and your expense.
See, you think exactly the same way I do. So it's the repellent is labeled to be applied every 2 weeks. Well, so is the fungicide, and those classic hybrid teas need fungicide. And now that they have leaves, so I'm just, it only takes about a gallon to spray to that garden. So I just mix up a gallon of deer repellent, put my fungicide in it, and go to town every 2 weeks. But
There you go.
the roses that need to be preserved the most from there, I'm going to transplant them out.
Yeah.
That way I'm not relying on the chemical to keep the deer off. I'm just going to keep them away from it completely. And I hope that works. So by next spring, things will be a little bit different around here, but I think they're going to be a whole lot better.
Absolutely. I'm just thrilled that you have the deer fence. We've tried everything too, and we've used a lot of that plastic fencing for temporary in the winter because it's the winter when we've had the worst time. And just that early spring, like you talked about, they just
Yeah.
nibble everything off. I mean, we had one year that even Pecky Martin got nibbled down practically to the ground. I mean, they just went after her. So yeah, we. I want an aesthetic garden. I love the beauty of the garden, but out in my garden, so often you see a little rabbit cage fence, you see a little this, you see a little that. We've had to wrap some things just to protect them. We see these, we have deer that come right up to the critter cam and practically smile. And all we see is like a nose or an eyeball. So they're curious about us as well.
I have one photo from years ago. It's one eye and eyelashes.
Oh yeah, they're curious about us and our stuff too.
They absolutely are. And most of the reading I did on deer fence, they were talking about also excluding rabbits and other things. It's like, like you, I cage the smaller roses against the rabbits. I just drop like a hardware cloth cage on top of it, and that keeps them away. I wasn't going to barricade the bottom of the fence to try to keep the rabbits out. Just keep the deer out. That was the most important thing. But I do curse the rabbits.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So I know we love wildlife, but they're just so destructive to the garden, so destructive these days. I just don't remember ever having this problem. This is really relatively new to us, but we're just like you. We have a lot of new buildings going on and large swaths of land that used to be cornfields or whatever are now big additions. So it's just things have changed. They've changed, and we have to protect some of our little pretties.
And we have to change with it.
Yeah, we do.
We really, really do. Yeah, it was a little bit of a nuisance, and now it's a real problem. So the garden changes. So fortunately, the fence that we put up is not too obvious. I was in a garden in Northern Virginia this past spring, and the rose garden looked like a fortress.
Yeah, it's bad. I know.
It fit perfectly into their landscape. It was hidden by hedges, so it was perfect. But it's like, yeah, I can't do this.
One of the things we did was we lined my herb garden where my cutting flowers are with rabbit proof fencing. And we didn't do this, but we got this tip later. And for people who are doing it now, if you take that fencing, that metal fencing, the rabbit, I can't think of the total name for it right now, but it's the rabbit fencing, and you paint it black, you really see through it and don't even see it at all. I don't see mine just because I'm used to it, but it's definitely there. And once everything gets big, you don't see it as much. But it has saved my cutting garden. I mean, it absolutely saved my cutting garden. But I wish we had have known to have thought of that. And we have done that for some other areas to protect. Just paint that black, and boy, it disappears.
That's a really great tip.
Yeah, it does. It's really, you think it's going to show up more, but it really doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm thrilled with the deer fence. It really doesn't show up unless you're right at it. All I can see from the house are the arches that the netting fence is suspended from. So all I see is arches. Good. I'm good with that.
Absolutely. Connie, this has been so fun. Thanks so much for joining me today and sharing the great work of one of the giants in the rose world that we just don't hear enough about.
Well, I hope everybody enjoyed it and I didn't overwhelm you with information. Dr. Van, I tend to really latch onto historical figures who were ahead of their time and imaginative and diversified. And Dr. Van Fleet fills all of those niches.
Mm-hmm. Well, big kudos to you too for all the preservation that you do for these timeless treasures. You're having, what did you say, 500 in your garden, and so many of them are, they are just treasures, and it's our history and it's our future, I think.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I do it because it's important, and it's kind of nice when other people notice it.
Well, friends, we're so glad you joined us today. And if you enjoyed today's chat or any of the Rose Chats, please share them with a friend. And until next time, happy gardening.
You've been listening to the Rose Chat podcast with Chris VanCleave and Teresa Byington, expert rose gardeners who want to help you achieve the rose garden of your dreams. Don't miss an episode. Listen anytime on our website at rosechatpodcast.com or listen on the go via the Rose Chat app on iTunes and Stitcher Radio. Share this podcast with your social networks and join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram by using the hashtag RoseChat. Join us next time for another edition of the Rose Chat podcast. The Rose Chat podcast is a production of the Rose Chat Media Group, Birmingham, Alabama.